Hey everyone, so today we're going to show you how to do a pre-op inspection on our mini excavator. First things first, I tell people on pretty much all my videos, I'm not an expert, I'm not claiming to be. Just going to show you kind of how I do my pre-ops, and if you've seen other videos, they're pretty similar. First things first, I always recommend checking your manual for the piece of equipment you're using. Almost all of them will have a checklist in the manual. Otherwise, just do some online research. The other thing I think is really important pre-ops, I will say that probably the most important part of operating equipment is doing a thorough pre-op inspection. But also, you don't need to be a diesel mechanic. I think, and I can speak from experience, when you first start, you feel like you're intimidated by a pre-op because you may not know all the pieces of the machine. Don't worry about that. Again, it's really high level to identify potential issues. If there's anything you don't understand, that's where you can loop in a mechanic from the shop or another resource you might have. A lot of it is as simple as if it doesn't look right, that's something you should follow up on. But again, don't get intimidated by it, but make sure you do a thorough pre-op at the beginning of every one of your shifts. Now, with my pre-ops, as you've seen, I break it down into three different segments there. My first is a general walk around. That's for big picture, just to see some of those obvious pieces. So I do a full walk around. My second is then my compartments. That's when I'm opening a compartment and checking fluids, looking at other things inside the machine. And then my third and final is the operator seat, or inside the cab. That's my final piece. Those are the three ways, those are the three things I do. Again, there's no right or wrong, that's just one thing I do, and I try and be consistent no matter the piece of equipment. Now, first thing, my walk around. I generally start on my driver's side. The driver's the entry door on whatever piece, and I work counterclockwise is what I try to do. Again, the more you can get in a habit, the easier it is no matter the piece. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. We'll do the walk around first. So the first thing is just on my walk around, anything visual. I'm starting at the top of the cab. I like to start top, work my way down. So I'm looking up top on the operator's cab and seeing if any glass is broken, the lights on the front, if I see anything obvious there that sticks out. Obviously, you're working your way down towards the undercarriage, which is probably the most important piece. However, don't overlook. I've seen sometimes there's damage or something to the top of the machine that gets missed. Then we're gonna go down to the undercarriage. Now on the undercarriage, it's really important. There's a few different things you're looking at. First of all, I'm just looking at my track pads. Seeing, especially on the mini excavator, making sure they're all evenly spaced. You can often see if there's damage to one based on the spacing. So you may not have to look at every individual track pad, but what I can do is look around the entire thing and see if something doesn't look right on the spacing, that means there could be something loose. Outside of that, I'm then looking at my rollers underneath there to make sure they're free of debris. There's nothing that could cause any damage there. I'm looking at the idler in the front to make sure there's no damage on that. All the rollers along there. And then I'm looking at my final drive that's in the rear. And on that, you're looking at the sprocket to see if there's any damage to any of the teeth. If any of the teeth are overly sharp, that could be a sign of wear, anything like that could cause some damage. And then I'm also looking at the final drive itself, the motor, to see if there's any leaks. If I see any leaking from the front of that or any damage, that would be something I'd want to look into further. Okay, continuing counterclockwise, now I'm on the rear of the machine. Again, starting at the top, making sure there's no damage to the cab or anything like that. We do have there's a mirror in the back there, making sure there's nothing obvious that sticks out. And then coming down to underneath the machine. I often see this as overlooked on a lot of machines, is looking underneath the machine. And I tell people it's pretty similar to your car parked in your garage. When you back out and you see a stain, that's a good indicator something's going on. So I try and never overlook that. Is every time I go out to do a pre-op, I try and look under that machine, specifically where the engine is. If there was anything that's leaking, it's gonna show signs right underneath the machine. So I'm looking underneath to see if I see anything obvious. Outside of that, I'm then looking on the inside of the final drives. So I can see in the back here if there's any leaks or anything on those final drives, that would stick out. And then I can also get a good look at both the pads again on the tracks on both sides, and then the rollers, the undercarriage there, to see if there's anything obvious. Sometimes I've even caught if there's a big rock or boulder that might be something on the inside of it that you can't see. If you can see it then, you can clean it out before you start moving the machine. It's always better to get that done. And then also like your exhaust system on the mini excavators right here, making sure that's obviously intact. There's no damage or anything to that. Then continuing counterclockwise, now we're on the other side. I call it the passenger side of the machine. Again, look, starting at the top, see if there's any damage, anything on the cab, coming down, see if there's anything on the machine that sticks out, and then coming down lower to that undercarriage again. Basically, same check I did on the other side. I'm looking first of all at my track pads, seeing if there's anything obvious. If I see any pads that look, the spacing doesn't look right or something's different there. Otherwise, I'm also looking at my rollers underneath there. I'm checking the idler in the front and then coming all the way around again to my rear drive, the final drives, making sure the sprocket there's no, again, if any of those are abnormally sharp or anything like that, could be some damage. And seeing if anything else sticks out, seeing if that final drive has any leaks or anything coming out of the back there. And that would conclude on that side of this drive. Okay, continuing around the front, now I'm onto the front of the mini excavator with the arm. Before I keep moving forward though, this is where you can see on the top of the arm. So all the hydraulic line connections are right here. That's where I'm looking, where all the hoses. There's no obvious leaks, anything loose, there's no damage, anything like that. And then I'm coming around, I'm looking at any hydraulic cylinder here. So as we get to the front arm and my kind of backhoe swing on the side here, I'm looking at my cylinder. This is where I like to look at the seal to going into that cylinder. If you see any abnormal, if it was leaking or anything like that, a lot of times you'll see that dirt or debris will stick to that oil. So if I saw any indicators of something on that cylinder wasn't clean, there might be a seal, there might be something wrong with that. So other than that, I'm looking at all my connections there to all the pins and bushings, and all the connections here where everything's connected, seeing if I see anything obvious. While I'm on this side, I'm looking at my front blade on the machine. Same thing, making sure there's no obvious damage. There's connection points underneath there. And then I'm looking at this side of the arm. As I'm looking at every single hydraulic cylinder for the same things to see if there's any leak or any obvious damage, anything that sticks out. And I'm looking at all my lines at the same time, all those hydraulic hoses, to see if anything looks if it looks like it's leaking or damaged or anything like that. And I come all the way down to the front side here. That comes all the way down then to my hydraulic thumb, and then coming all the way down to my bucket. So I'm looking at all the connections here, making sure there's nothing loose in there. Hoses are all intact, no damage. And then on my bucket, I'm just making sure my teeth are not overly worn, so there's no damage or anything to the teeth or the bucket. And then finally, continuing around the front, looking at the front of the arm while I'm going around there to make sure the same thing with the cylinders, the hoses, the connections, all the pins and bushings for the bucket, all those connections. No damage on this side of the bucket, and then again going all the way down along the arm to make sure there's nothing, any of those hoses, making sure there's no leaks or any damage, and then the hydraulic cylinders all the way down, and then coming all the way down on this side to the same thing, looking at the front there. And then finally, while I'm on this side, I'm looking at the front again of the cab to make sure I see my lights up top, the glass up top, and seeing if there's any damage underneath that I can see on the blade on this side. And that finishes our general walk around of the mini excavator. Okay, now that I did my walk around, the next part is the compartments. This is where I'm actually opening the compartments and checking. I do tell people you should be opening every single compartment on a machine before you start. Regardless if you're checking fluid levels or anything, it's a good sign of what's going on inside the machine. It's an access point, so you should be at least popping them open. On this one, again, I start the same thing and do counterclockwise. So right underneath, this is where our hydraulic cylinder, our hydraulic controls are for the machine, where all the connections are. So I'm looking underneath there, seeing if there's any leaks to any of those hoses or any of those connections. This is where you would switch it from ISO or SAE controls. We do have a separate video on that trains the difference between those. But again, looking at all those connections, see if there's anything obvious from looking inside there. Next, continuing around to the rear, is where we're going to access the main parts of the engine. So in here, again, each machine's gonna be a little bit different, but I know I have, I can check my oil. So that's, you see the dipstick right in there. And again, I generally will throw a towel or something. So I'm checking the oil on the machine. Also have my fuel filters there. So I'm looking inside, it's a clear glass. You're looking to see if there's any debris or if there's any separation, like there might be water in your fuel at all. Anything there? And then again, while you're looking, you're just looking inside at the engine. Seeing if there's anything that looks loose, any damage. This is a good indicator just by looking and seeing if something just doesn't look right inside there. After that, for this machine, that door stays open. For this Komatsu machine, this the only way you can get this next compartment open. So on this side then, I'm looking, I've got my radiator there. So part of this, when you open these up, see if there's any obvious damage. For your radiator, any of those fins, you want to make sure that no debris got in there, damage the fins on the radiator, anything like that. Starting kind of at the top, my air filter's right here. Most of these will have a little discharge there. You should be doing this every day. You kind of pinch that open. If you get a lot of debris that comes out of that, that's a good indicator that you need to pull that. We generally pull our air filters out once a week and we'll clean them out or see if they need to be replaced. But daily, we usually just open that discharge and make sure there's nothing clogged or there would be a lot of debris in there. And then coming down, I'm kind of looking, I've got two of my tanks, or I've got a coolant level here that I can see, and I've also got my hydraulic oil level on here. And again, depending on how the machine is parked with the cylinders, you should know the appropriate level. Typically for us, we're gonna be on the low side. If I had all these arms out retracted, you're most likely gonna be at the high line there, but it's making sure that you see the fluid and it looks appropriate. And then coming down on this, I'm looking at your battery connections, making sure there's no excessive corrosion or anything on the terminal. Again, we don't rarely, weekly or monthly, I might pull those off and actually clean them. But daily, I'm just looking to see if anything's obvious or if I see any damage or anything like that. And it looks good. Finally, on this side, this is where our fuel fill is, and also for our the coolant fill. So I flip that open. There's really nothing other than I've got windshield washer fluid in your check, but otherwise I'm just looking to see if there's any damage, make sure my coolant cap is on. This is where my diesel goes, making sure the cap's on. There is a gauge on the side here that can also tell level. But again, this is one of those ones where you're just opening, make sure caps are on, making sure there's no damage, anything like that. That completes our compartment check. And now we're gonna move inside the operator seat. Final piece is getting in the operator seat, doing the final checks there. So first thing, opening my main door. I always make sure it latches, make sure there's nothing broken on that. And then you're just looking before you get in that everything, your handlebars, everything's secure. So when you're getting in, you got 3 points of contact. After that, I'm then stepping into the seat. Once I'm in, first I'm checking the seat belt, make sure no damage or anything like that. Make sure it latches. And then before I start the machine, you're just making sure there's free range of motion on all the controls. There's no damage or anything like that. So making sure my lock lever goes down, making sure all of my controls are completely free. Also making sure the boots on the joysticks. I've seen a lot of the older machines, your boots often will get damaged. The bad part there is you're getting a lot of debris or things can get into the controls underneath there. So you want to make sure those are intact. Same thing with my front track paddles, making sure they're full free range of motion, no damage. And then other than that, just looking around to see if you see any damage. If you're working for a company, some of the little things, just even noting how dirty it is, if there's trash, anything like that. But also any damage you note, I think the key on all of this, which I may not have said earlier, sometimes noting that damage is also important just to document it, because the last thing you want to do is get to the end of your shift, or if you've rented a machine or anything like that, and then find damage. And then did you do it or not? So that's why it's really important to do these at the beginning. Now, after I've done all that, I've looked in the cab, seen everything looks good. I'm going to pull that back up. My final check is to actually turn the machine on. So I'm going to turn it one click. Regardless, usually the manufacturer, nowadays they're all computerized. So they're going to run a system of checks. So that's where when I turn it on, I've got a small display in here that I'm looking to see if any indicators come up. I'm also then checking any fluid levels, so such as fuel. If I did have a machine that was tier 4 running on DEF, often I'll get an indicator on there, but seeing if anything comes up. Everything looks good there. The final piece I do is I fire it up. After I start the machine up, That's my final check, and honestly, it's a little bit of where you just start listening. If I hear anything that might sound abnormal, obviously if the machine had trouble starting, there's a lot of other indicators there that might mean something needs to be looked at further. But after I see everything's running good, we are good to go. That completes my checks inside the operator's seat. Okay, so that was our complete pre-op inspection for our mini excavator. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, please put in the comments if you have any tips, tricks, anything I might have missed or things you look at differently. We always love to hear from our viewers to get tips and tricks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.